All right, welcome back in, everybody. It's good to see you today. I hope you're doing well wherever you're watching from. This is the 21 off season. It's the Kansas City Chiefs. It's the offensive line again. Why? Because Kansas City has put so much attention on the offensive line this off season. They've spent so much time on it. There have been so many changes and so many things to talk about. So that's why we're doing a video today. There's actually so much to talk about. I'm going to turn it into two different videos. One is strictly for 2021. We're just going to look at the guys that are on the roster right now before the draft, before Kansas City does anything else throughout the offseason, and look at the guys who may be having a very good chance to start and which spots they might start. And we'll also look at the finances for 2021. I'll do a separate video probably in a few minutes here. I'll try to link them both together where we talk about beyond 2021, what the offensive line decisions might look like and the finances that go along with that. Okay, let's get started. I've got 10 guys up here. I didn't include Winogo, I didn't include Williams, and I didn't include Durant. Okay, there's a chance that they could be on the roster for sure. There's a chance they might even have an impact, but out of the guys that we're talking about today, I think these 10 really have a much better chance of making an impact in 2021 than Winogo, Durant, or Williams. Okay, so we're just talking about these guys today. I've got Tooney at the top, okay? New addition, comes over from the Patriots, huge contract. I won't talk about that a lot today. But just looking at Tooney, the player, there's really not enough good things you can say about this guy. He's not an elite guard. That is, he's not the kind of guy who's going to be up for all pros year in and year out, not a Hall of Fame kind of a guard. But this guy is really good, okay? This guy is solid as can be. He's consistent. And, you know, in my opinion, he's a good bit better than Eric Fisher was at his position, even though he's playing guard. And I think you can ink in, not even just a pencil, I think you can ink in Joe Tooney at left guard. Now, did he move around a little bit with the Patriots? Yes, when the Patriots absolutely had to have him do that. Could he do that some for the Chiefs? Yes, but I think if you see Tooney move around to other starting positions besides left guard, I think that probably means something else bad has gone on with the offensive line in 2021, because I think you have enough other guys competing for enough other spots to where you don't need to ask Tooney to move around. I also don't think you sign a guy to a 5-year, $80 million contract and ask him to immediately change positions. That's not to say the Chiefs won't do that. I just don't expect that. So I fully expect Tooney to be starting at left guard this season, and I think he'll be starting there all season. I really don't expect him to move around, although, you know, sometimes things come up you don't expect, you don't plan for, and you end up asking somebody to move around. But I think you can see Tooney start there at left guard. We'll see what Kansas City wants to do with that. After that, I've got Blythe here at center. Blythe is not your next best offensive lineman, not by a long shot, but I do think you can kind of pencil in Blythe as the starter at center for now until further notice. He started at center for the Rams. He looked pretty good doing it. Not dominant, at times not even completely consistent, but I think you feel a whole lot better right now with Blythe at center than you did a couple of weeks ago when you really had nobody for sure that you knew was going to step in and play center. And the price is right. You know, Blythe is making, I think, $990,000. Give or take a few thousand. So the price is right. There's no risk here at all. And you've got a guy here who has started at center before, and at times it has looked good. At other times hasn't looked quite as awesome. But he just, you can expect him to be the starter at center until further notice, until somebody steps in and takes that job away from him. That is, until Kansas City drafts a center, or unless they decide that they've got somebody like an Allegretti who they feel good about moving into center and just taking over that starting role. But for now, I think you can pencil in Blythe right there at center and proceed all the way through the offseason and start the regular season that way. And that's why I've got Blythe listed number 2 there on the board. After that, after Tooney at left guard and Blythe at center, all bets are off. It is a huge, huge game of musical chairs for 2021 as to who is going to be starting where. I'm going to present my own thoughts on it here in just a second as we go through, but I guarantee every single person who's watching this video and every single person who's writing about the Kansas City Chiefs is going to have a different take about what player is going to be started at what position and for how long in 2021. They have a lot of guys The depth is better than last year. They have a lot of guys who could be in a lot of different combinations. And of course, injuries are going to come and force Kansas City to move them around even more once the season starts. But for now, this is what we've got. I think Tooney at left guard, I think, is a solid bet. No reason to move him off of there. And Blythe at center. Your next best offensive lineman is Andrew Wiley. Now, that may be a surprise to some people, but Wiley is just too good to not be starting somewhere on the Kansas City Chiefs, and frankly, not be starting anywhere in the NFL. At what position? Well, that's kind of anybody's guess. His best spot to me is guard. I think that's where he naturally fits in. I think it might have been Dan who might have asked me, could he even move in at center before they signed Blythe? And yeah, I think Wiley is flexible enough to where he could have moved to center if Kansas City really needed him to do that. I don't think it's his naturally best position. I think guard is his naturally best spot. I personally don't think that Wiley's going to be starting at guard this year. I think when you look at the guys that will go through today's roster, and this is before the draft even comes, I think there's a need there from Kansas City for Wiley to kind of graduate, if you will, out to one of the tackle spots. Which tackle spot? I don't know. That's kind of between him and Rimmers and Yang. But for now, I think you can kind of sort of pencil in Wiley as one of the starting tackles, right or left. I don't have a clue which, but I think he kind of graduates out there. He kind of gets pushed out of there by necessity out to one of the tackle positions. And listen, Wiley doesn't get a lot of attention, and Wiley has been overlooked and underestimated and undervalued for his entire career. And yet he keeps on starting. And the reason for that is because he's so consistent and he's so flexible. Now, he's not dominant. He's not elite. I don't expect him to compete for Pro Bowls. But this guy is a guy who is just a good, solid starter. And given time and practice, given enough time to get accustomed to a position, I think he can pretty much start anywhere on the offensive line. And like I said, I still think guard is his best spot, but I think he's just going to get pushed out to one of those two tackle spots. I think the same thing is true for Mike Rimmers. I think Rimmers is going to be one of your starting two tackles, at least heading into the 2021 season. That may not remain the case. I'll talk about Niang here in a few seconds. But Rimmers is a guy who looked really good for you last year. Rimmers really moved around all over the place. And yet he was consistent, he produced, he's tough, he's flexible, he's smart. And it's kind of bewildering. You know, the Vikings signed him to a large contract years ago. It flat out didn't work out. Who knows why, but he comes over here to Kansas City a few years later, and he's just exactly what the doctor ordered, okay? He just does all kinds of things, and he's consistent at those spots. Now, again, Rimmers is not dominant. Rimmers is not even what I would call above average for a starting offensive lineman, but I do think that Rimmers and Wiley provide enough football IQ, enough toughness, enough consistency, enough flexibility to where they're going to be starting somewhere in 2021, somewhere on the offensive line. And I think right now you're going to see them get pushed out to the left and right tackle spots. And I don't know who's going to take which tackle spot, but that's kind of what you're looking at right now. Rimmers produced very well for you, so did Wiley. Wiley has been incredibly undervalued his entire career and underestimated by a lot of people who kind of project starting offensive line positions, but I think he's going to be starting somewhere. And I think the same thing is true for Rimmers. I think, and he's costing you a little bit more this year. Rimmers is, I think, $3.3 million this season, so he's costing you more than last year. But that's okay. One of my earlier videos, I said the first thing I would do is run straight back to Rimmers and see if I could get him with us for one more season before the other team started getting down to the lower free agents and started offering him more money than we really wanted to pay him. So I think this is an excellent move by Kansas City to bring Rimmers in. Even if you're not sure exactly where he's going to start and where he's going to play, it's just a good solid move to have a guy like Rimmers here. And I really think that he's going to hold down one of those starting tackle spots for you. And when I say hold down, again, these aren't elite guys. These aren't Pro Bowlers. These aren't above average guys, but they can hold down that starting spot, and at least you're not bleeding. You don't have a major hole in the offensive line. You're not getting hurt and crushed here on the offensive line, and that's important for 2021. After that, so that's left guard, that is center, that is the two tackle spots. After that, I've got three guys here who I think are going to be competing for the right guard spot. And that's Allegretti, who we saw last year kind of hold down the left guard spot for the entire season once he got into that role. Held it down all the way through, looked very good doing it. Very good, solid offensive lineman. And then you have Dr. Laurent coming back, who didn't play last year. He didn't play the entire season because of the opt-out. And Laurent didn't look as good in 2019 as he had in 2017 or 2018. Really, his best year ever was 2017. He's kind of regressed just a little bit. What version of Dr. Laurent are you going to get in 2021? Nobody knows. I'm sure he doesn't know. Now, he's smart. He'll be working hard. The effort will be there. But what will the result, the performances be? We'll see. But he'll be competing for that right guard spot, and so will Kyle Long. I want to talk about Kyle Long here for a second, and then we'll talk about the entire right guard spot. Kyle Long is a guy who, in his first 3 seasons, made Pro Bowl, Pro Bowl, Pro Bowl. And then all of a sudden, the bottom dropped out. The injuries hit. Even when he got on the field, he wasn't very consistent. It is I don't have the right word for it, but it's a vicious cycle for a lot of people in the NFL to get caught up in that I, the injuries and inconsistency category. And at a certain point, you just kind of don't know what the real player is, and that really is kind of their nature. They're injured and inconsistent, and maybe the injuries are causing all the inconsistency, but that's what they become. And football is just a vicious game in that way. And Kyle Long, really, it's been 5 years. 5 years. That is an eternity in sports. That's an eternity in the NFL. It has been 5 years since we've seen him play any more than half a season for anybody. Okay, after those first 3 seasons, when he made Pro Bowl in each of his first 3 years, the injuries hit. And basically for the next 5 years, it's been he played 4 games, he played 10 games, he played 8 games, 8 games, and then last year he didn't play at all. He wasn't even a COVID opt-out last year. As far as I know, basically last season, 2021, he was retired and out of football. Now, I love Long's athleticism. I love his attitude. I love his energy. I love his talent base. I love his genetics. It's all there. But so are the injuries and the inconsistency. And it's kind of a Jekyll and Hyde kind of a player here. So I love them bringing him in. He's only like $1.5 million. The price is right. He's kind of a kick butt kind of a guy that's perfect, kind of a perfect fit for Kansas City, who just has a lot of consummate professionals, right? But you still like to have some of those guys in the mix, like a Kyle Long, who's kind of got a rough edge to him. And I really like them bringing him in, whether he starts or not. And I personally would not project him to win a starting spot at right guard or anywhere else. I wouldn't project him, even if he wins a starting spot, I wouldn't project him to hold that starting spot down. Because like I said, it's been 5 years since he played any more than half a season in the NFL. That's a really long time. It doesn't get easier with age, as we all know. It gets harder and harder to come back from those injuries. It gets harder and harder to play the game. It gets harder and harder to go up against the young guys who are coming out of college. It gets more difficult just to get out of bed, right? That's just the way it is. So for Long, I'm glad he's here. I think he'll play some important snaps this year at some point, whether that's in September or whether that's all the way over in the playoffs. I think at some point you're going to see him play 200, 400 important snaps. But to expect Kyle Long to come in with his kind of record, his kind of history on the football field and start all season long and win a starting job and continue all the way through the playoffs is just not realistic. So I think he's battling here for this spot. I think, in my opinion, the odds-on favorites are Dr. LDT and Allegretti. If I was betting, I would bet on Allegretti to win that job, but we'll see. Dr. Laurent could just as easily come back very strong, put together the best season he's ever had. He might come back refreshed. He might come back better than he's ever been. So I think these two guys right here, Allegretti and Dr. LDT, I think those are the two guys that are competing for that right guard spot. And I think Kyle Long has a chance at it, but I wouldn't bet on Long. I do think all three of these guys are going to play some important snaps at some point during the season. It's just the nature of the NFL. It's the nature of the offensive line. It's the nature of the setup that Kansas City has this year. Basically, they've got one above average offensive lineman this year, and the rest of them are all kind of in the good, solid journeyman category or just in the good, solid starter category, okay? So you've got basically one guy who's a difference maker. Everybody else is consistent and capable of filling in or holding down a starting spot for the season. That's kind of what you're looking at when you look at this year. Projection-wise, the top five, the starting five, do not project to be as good as they projected to be in 2020 before the COVID opt-outs and before all the injuries. The starting five, and I want to say this carefully so I say it right, the starting five of Fisher and Schwartz at tackle, with Ryder at center, and with Wiley and Dr. Laurent at the guards, those starting five last offseason, they projected to be a whole lot better than this year's starting five. Now, you're a lot deeper this year. I think this season you go about 9 deep before injuries really start to just crush you the way they did last offseason. Last year, and I made this point in the offseason videos, I really thought you went about 7 deep. I really thought you could afford to get 2 injuries before the injuries were really going to start to make a difference. Kansas City, it turned out, really, I thought offensive line-wise, they played well far past the 2 injury limit. They brought Allegretti was a surprise. I don't think anybody really knew for sure that he was going to be able to play that well. And Remmers had a lot more flexibility than I think anybody thought that he necessarily would have. They played well deep into the playoffs, and it was really only into the Super Bowl with that final nail in the coffin when Fisher went down a week or 2 before the Super Bowl. That was really kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, right? The offensive line really performed well all through last year. Not crisp, not great, not dominant, not elite, not wonderful, but good, solid offensive line performance last year until you got to the Super Bowl. Nevertheless, your depth is better this year. Your starting five does not project to be as good. That's not to say that they can't work together and be good. They just don't project to be. It's going to be almost impossible to lose Fisher and Schwartz in one off season and actually get better from the starting five perspective, okay? Brings us down to Niang. Niang, 3rd round draft pick from Texas Christian in 2019. COVID opt-out in 2020. He's going to stand a very good chance of winning a starting tackle job. Maybe from Remmers, maybe from Wiley, maybe he gets the left tackle, maybe the right tackle. But nobody knows at this point. I think if you draft a guy in the 3rd round, I think you have every reason to expect that eventually he's going to start and play for your team. The best thing that could happen, the absolute best thing that could happen for Kansas City this year would be for Niang to win that starting tackle spot. Either one, I almost don't care. I mean, I know common thinking is left tackle, but part of me doesn't care. As long as he can step up and take over one of those starting tackle jobs and play so well that you don't even think of trying to get somebody to compete with him for that starting job, that's the best thing that can happen to this offensive line this year. If Niang can step up and win that. Now, he looked good in college, but I said this on a previous video, so did hundreds of other players over the past couple of seasons. They also looked good in college. I haven't seen him on an NFL football field. Nobody has. The coaches, I'm sure, have a pretty good idea of what he can do, not only because they spent time studying him in the draft, but because they've seen him up close in personal workouts and things of that nature. But we really don't know yet what he's going to do. So I haven't yet projected him as taking over a starting tackle job, but as we progress through the offseason, we'll go through training camp, he may very well step up and win that starting tackle job. And if he does, that is absolutely, unequivocally the best thing that can happen to Kansas City this year, is if he steps up and takes over one of those starting tackle jobs and just doesn't give it up. If he does that, that gives you, 3 more seasons for him at a cheap price as your starting tackle. That gives you 21, 22, and 23 where you don't have to worry about the tackle spot. And oh, by the way, it kind of gives you a lot more flexibility with the other positions, okay? So that's the best thing that can happen. These 3 guys competing at guard, Wiley and Remmers right now are just the most experienced guys who might push out the tackle. Blythe right now penciled in at center until somebody else takes over that spot. and Tooney is your best bet to be your left guard. Martinez Rankin, really, there's a part of me that likes Rankin, and yet there's a part of me that realizes in reality he just hasn't played much in the NFL, and maybe he's never going to. Kansas City has had him now. I think this is the third season in a row that they've had him. I lose track here. But Rankin just has not been able to get on the football field. And when you've had a guy for long enough, and we see how many injuries Kansas City had last year, and we see how many doors were open for somebody to take over a starting spot, or at least a reserve role, and Rankin still never gets on the field, you kind of sort of start to feel like, well, maybe Kansas City just kind of has the feeling that he's not going to be the guy here at offensive line. So I don't count Rankin as one of your 9 guys that provide depth. He's there. I think he's going to win a starting spot probably. I'm sure he'll be competing with that for Wanogo and Williams and whoever Kansas City drafts and Durant. But for now, Rankin is a guy that I like and yet just has not seemed to find a spot on the NFL football field, okay? So maybe he's not as good as I have always liked him. Witzman is a guy, Brian Witzman is a guy who does provide depth. Now, do I want Witzman starting at any of my tackle spots or my guard spots or my center spot? The answer is no, at least not for any length of time. But if I needed him to come in and play a quarter, if I need him to come in and play for 2 weeks while a starter gets healthy, if I needed him to come in and play for a month while I've got a couple of guys out, I know those guys are coming back, then yes, Witzman does provide depth. This is key here. I would rather have Brian Witzman coming in and playing for 4 games until my starters get healthy than I would to have my 5th round draft pick from 2020 or from 2021 coming in, because I have no clue what my 5th rounder is going to do, but I have a very good idea what Witzman's going to do. He's going to be tough. He's going to be very limited athletically with what he can do. And yet, I know that he can step in and be a decent, halfway decent offensive lineman for 2 to 4 weeks. I can give him some help. I can shift coverage over to help him out if he's got a tough assignment that week. But he'll hold his own for 2 to 4 weeks. Now, you absolutely do not want to see Witzman playing for an entire season, starting a new position. That's bad news. If that happens, that means that Kansas City has had a rash of injuries and there's nobody else to plug in. But I would still rather have Witzman here, and the price is right. It's less than $1 million this season. I would rather have Witzman starting here than I would to have a very low round draft pick or an undrafted rookie free agent coming in who's never seen any time on the football field at all. Witzman is a much, much better option, and he does provide depth in the short term for, say, 2 to 4 weeks if you absolutely need somebody to do that. So those are your guys. You've got basically 9 guys here who provide depth, and this is before the draft. We'll see what Kansas City does in the draft. There's a million different directions they could go in. I'll talk a little bit more about the draft in my next video that I'm going to make here in just a few minutes. But this is kind of what you've got. The starting 5 looks to be solid, but not dominant. I don't think they're going to be as good as they were projected to be last year before the injuries and the opt-outs. And once again, we never saw Kansas City's starting 5 last year, not for one game. Dr. Laurent went down with COVID opt-out before the season ever started. In week 5, Mitchell Schwartz was gone, week 5 or 6, and we just never did see Kansas City's projected starting 5 for last year. So we never did know what they could do, but they did project to be a better starting 5 than this year's starting 5. But still, it's a solid group. You're going to be fine. I think the depth is there. I think you'll have a good, decent chance of helping protect Patrick Mahomes. You've also got Blake Bell coming in at tight end. That talked about him kind of being a 6th offensive lineman, even more than a tight end. They signed Michael Burton back at fullback, so you bring in another guy here who can kind of block and help out. I think Kansas City kind of has the blocking thing figured out, even though they're not going to be dominant. If you go up against a dominant defensive line, if you go up against another Tampa Bay defensive line, or if you go up against a healthy and motivated Cleveland defensive line, or if there's several defensive lines in football that could give this group a lot of trouble. But in general, week in and week out, you've got an offensive line here who can at least give Mahomes enough time to get the football out to his weapons, which he has a lot of. And of course, Mahomes is just generically awesome, okay? Very quickly, before I shut down this video, I want to talk about the finances for 2021. on the offensive line, and they're excellent. They don't get any better than this. Tooney is only making, I think, $4.5 million this season. Now, the price jumps way up the next 4 seasons, so the average annual value is just skewed out the wazoo, okay? But for this season, he's making like $4.7 million, something like that. For this season, 2021, he's an absolute steal, right? Because they backloaded the contract, which is what a lot of teams did this year because of the COVID cap. Blythe, I already talked about him making $990,000. It does not get any cheaper for any player anywhere. You can't save money by getting somebody else. It's just not going to happen. Wiley's making a little bit more than $2 million. I think it's $2.3 million. I think was the tender that they placed on him. So he's very cheap for a starter. Remmers, I think, is making $3.3 million this year. Again, for a starter, a decent, solid starter, average starter. That's a good price, very good deal there. Alec Reddy, I think, is making $990,000, something like that. Dr. Laurent here is probably the worst deal on the offensive line this year, if you will. $4.5 million, $4.7 million, but still not a brutal price at all. So that's 5, 10, 15, 16, $17 million just for those guys. And then these guys are all making about $1 million each as well. So that's about $21 million this year for your top 10 offensive linemen. It does not get any better than that. So for 2021, you are in outstanding shape financially. You've been able, by virtue of letting go of Fisher and Schwartz, you basically cut, I forget what the number was. I think it was $15 million and $10 million or $8 million. You cut out over $20 million at that point off your offensive line. And that helped you out a lot this offseason because you've already done a lot of restructuring, which I hate for reasons that those of you who watch these videos already know. But that kept you from doing more restructuring. That kept you from being tempted to do even more restructuring than you already did. The Tyreek Hill restructuring fiasco notwithstanding. You've only got $21 million invested in these guys this year, okay? So very, very low price for 2021. We'll talk about beyond 2021 in the next video. But that's your finances. Those are your guys. A lot of things can happen right here with the musical chairs. We still haven't had the draft yet. If you've got a couple of guys come in from the draft, they could very well compete for a starting spot this year because you don't have as many spots locked up as you have had over the past 4 or 5 seasons. All right, that's it. Thank you a whole bunch. We'll see you next time. Bye.